programme, please call free phone 0800 88 8809. Lines will be open until 12:15 tonight and again tomorrow from 7:30 in the morning until 1:30 in the afternoon.
Yeovil, Somerset. Public fear has turned to anger. A child sex killer, Sidney Cooke, has been released from prison. These parents believe he's in a police cell in their town.
I can confirm that Sidney Cooke is in custody in the Yeovil and Somerset police area. Well, we already know that, don't we?
A senior police officer is regularly visiting the man they fear.
He spends a lot of time watching television. He reads the papers. He cleans his accommodation. He sends out for meals. He has his own money. And he generally busies himself living under supervision in secure accommodation.
What Sidney Cooke did with his friends is every parent's nightmare, and the children share the adults' fear.
We want him to go because he can pinch people and kill people. There's a horrible man going around being horrible to little children. If I go to school and he comes up to me, I just don't want him to hurt me.
What I am clear about is that he is very well aware of the public reaction to him. And in fact, the distaste of the public for Mr. Cooke. He is certainly well aware of that, and obviously in some fear of that.
He tells you that, does he?
Oh, yes.
He tells you I'm afraid of them.
He is concerned by public reaction.
This is the story of a ring of men who used and killed children for pleasure, and of the dark truths about child sex abuse that lie within every community.
The first I knew about it was one Saturday evening, the news come on, and they said that they found a boy's body. Didn't give any name. I just said some poor parents are going to go through it, you know. A body's been found, some parents are going to go through it. Didn't think it was going to be me.
Jason Swift was aged 14.
He was obviously good looking from the day he was born. I'm not just saying that because he was my cousin. This is what people are saying. But no, he had a lovely feature in his face. He really did.
The BBC's Crime Watch reconstructed the last days of Jason's life. Jason's parents had separated 2 years previously, and later on he'd gone missing and slipped into a London underworld in which some homeless children were treated as common currency, to be passed around by adults and sexually abused.
I don't believe he was a homosexual, but he was being paid to commit homosexual acts, and that allowed him to buy food and sometimes gave him somewhere to stay for the night, and that's the sort of life he was leading.
Dear Mum, I'm okay. I haven't forgotten about you, so don't worry about me.
Neither of his parents had any idea of the world their son now inhabited.
I will come and see you in the next few months. Happy birthday, from Jason.
All I know that the media keep calling him a rent boy. As far as I'm concerned, he's not a rent boy. If he was a rent boy, it's only what Cooke and his cronies made him.
But on the 30th of November 1985, all the police knew was that a boy's body had been found in a field in Essex. And in most cases of child killing, the attacker isn't a stranger, but familiar to the victim. So once the body had been identified, the police intensely questioned Jason's close family. His father was questioned for 7.5 hours.
What was that like, Mr. Swift?
Very, very horrible. I thought I felt that I was the criminal. I had to go back to my childhood, from near enough the day I was born, right up to the present day at that time. I felt that I was being accused.
If you do recognise that most sexual offences against children are committed by somebody known to the child, then obviously the police would have to explore all avenues, and looking to members of the family would be a reasonable thing for them to do.
I still don't understand why. I felt that I was the one that was being accused.
Do you understand that, as a matter of fact, in most cases of child sex abuse, it is the immediate family, it is people closely known to the child, not a complete stranger who's responsible, and then that was why the police asked you those questions?
I didn't at the time, but I do know now, yeah.
But as the police pieced the facts together, they were gradually to discover that this was a very rare crime indeed. The sex killing of a child by a ring of adults. In November 1985, Jason had been taken to the Kingsmead estate in London's East End. And in this flat, a group of men had drugged, violently abused, and killed him.
The motivation seemed to be primarily a sexual one, to get sexual gratification out of him. Jason became less than a human being, and more just an object, a rag doll that could be tossed aside when it was all over.
Disposed of?
Disposed of. Yes, there didn't seem to be any kind of human sensitivity to the needs of Jason as a human being at all. He seemed to have been reduced to the level of being an object.
In 1989, when the case came to trial, the prosecution weren't confident that they could prove intent to murder. His killers were charged with manslaughter.
It was horrible. I was sitting up in the gallery in number 1 court in the Old Bailey, and there was Oliver and Cooke looking at me and giving me horrible smirky grins.
They were grinning at you?
Yeah.
You're sure?
Yeah. There was only me and some of the family in the gallery.
At the Old Bailey, the nature of true justice is literally written in stone, above the portico at the entrance. The inscription reads, "Punish the wrongdoer and defend the children." The police believed that others were involved in Jason's killing, but they only had evidence to convict 4. Stephen Barrell, who told his common-law wife about disposing of blood-stained clothing. Robert Oliver, who already had convictions for sexual offences against children. Leslie Bailey, previously convicted of a violent sex attack. And Sidney Cooke, who'd been arrested immediately after serving a sentence for a previous child sex offence. The police said he was the leader of the ring.
It's not right to think of a ring as being a lot of child sex molesters coming together for a convention, as it were. These are men that do have an interest in children, but it's the dynamics of the group that tend to take over. And probably the most important aspect of that is who's leading the ring. And if that man is very sadistic, if that man has fantasies that will really lead to the killing, the rest of the group will fall in with that.
It's believed that 3 of those convicted of this killing, Cooke, Oliver and Bailey, had themselves been abused as children.
The history of them is such that they were engaged in, or the victims of child abuse from a very early age. So I think it was a graduation that they conducted sex acts with each other and children. The children weren't killed, but gradually, as the desire to engage in more and more bizarre acts were concerned, they come to the stage where they killed somebody, and then they thought this is, from their words, great, and they wished to continue doing it, and they did.
In prison, Cooke, Bailey and Oliver began to boast about other cases of sadistic abuse and killings.
There are things I could tell you about, dear Sidney. The things he used to get up to.
And the other killings they talked about provoked a fellow prisoner, Ian Gabb, to break all the codes of prison life and to write down what he was being told and tell the authorities.
There you go. What is it now, Gabb?
I've got to tell someone. Look, I wrote it all down.
And it was unique in my experience. Although he was a sex offender, he would consider himself a heterosexual sex offender, which was different from what he was hearing when he was in prison. And I think that's what led him to coming forward in the first place.
The police set up an operation to run their informant, a convicted rapist, in jail. He was given no favours in return. The police deliberately had him moved at intervals so that he shared cells with Bailey, Oliver and Cooke, and wrote down what each of them told him. The ringleader, Cooke, was the one whom Gabb found the most disturbing, as he recorded in the notes he passed on to the police.
I moved in with Sidney Cooke yesterday afternoon. Please God, don't ever let this man walk our streets again. He continually talks about sex with children. It's really sickening. Cooke has already admitted to me that he's seen about 15 killed. He boasts of this figure.
We knew that they were talking to inmates, not talking to each other necessarily, and we just wanted any conversations that he had with them recorded so that it would give us a basis to start our inquiry.
With the help of that information, the police got one member of the ring, Bailey, to confess his role in further killings and to name others for their part. The police escorted Bailey outside prison to find out more. Bailey said Cooke, the ring's leader, was involved, and another man, Lenny Smith, a known paedophile whom the police had questioned over the Jason Swift case. To test Bailey's story, the police made him lead them to the place where he said he buried a boy. A young child's body had been found there in the Essex countryside. But sometimes Bailey confused the victims' names.
Sometimes he'd only just describe them as a small boy, small half-caste boy, that sort of information. I don't think they cared who they were. Certainly Sidney Cooke and Smith were not the least bit concerned about the boys' names. They just grabbed boys off the streets and then the kids were then abused at some later stage.
Barry Lewis was 6. Bailey pleaded guilty to his murder. There was insufficient evidence to prosecute anyone else.
Bye.
And Leslie Bailey told the police about the killing of one more boy, Mark Tildesley. He was 7. He disappeared years before in Wokingham in Berkshire. Crime Watch made this reconstruction as well. One afternoon, Mark had gone off by himself.
We used to live near the town. He used to go on his bike, go to the library on his own, go to the shop on his own. We didn't have no worry about him.
You were sure he'd come to no harm?
Oh yeah, we were sure he wouldn't come into any harm.
But he'd gone to the fair, and a paedophile was at the fairground, a predator, seeking a child to abduct. And Mark had turned up, perfect prey.
Many of them are experts. Many of them are well organised. They know how to befriend children, they know how to coach children. So they are very good at identifying potential victims. They're very good at sort of befriending children. And they are very determined and committed in making sure that they've got children available for their gratification.
Cooke had invited Smith and Bailey to come up from London and join him for a party, his term for child sex abuse. Mark was abducted, abused and killed, probably before his parents, Lavinia and John, even realised that he was missing.
I'll never forget the day, not at all. I went to work and then when I come back I said, "Where's Mark?" to John, and he said, "Mark's gone to the fair," and I told him we'd go and meet him. So we got ourselves organised and we went straight down there to meet him. And was he there? No.
Mark disappeared on June the 1st, 1984. The fairground isn't there anymore, but there is a small public memorial, a bench, where Mark Tildesley was last seen before he was abducted from the fair and killed. This young child, taken by a stranger, was the ring's first known victim.
Those victims were all children who lived their life on the street. They spent the major part of the day outside their parents' control, riding bicycles, mixing with children on the street, not reporting back to their parents for hours on some occasions. And so to prevent that sort of abuse, then you should know where your children are.
Bailey pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Mark Tildesley, but neither Cooke, who he said abducted him, nor Smith, who he said actually killed Mark, were charged. The Crown Prosecution Service thought prosecutions against them for Mark Tildesley's death would fail because they'd rely heavily on Bailey's evidence.
He admitted his guilt in Mark Tildesley's murder, although he wasn't the person who actually killed him. He implicated Cooke and Smith.
And they were both named in connection with Mark's death in court at Bailey's trial. Bailey told the police that Cooke led the others and disposed of Mark's body. The child's body has never been found, but the Tildesleys keep a burial place for him. And his mother pleads with Sidney Cooke. Tell the truth about their son.
He does know where he's put Mark, and I'd just like to know where, so we can have a burial and just live in peace now, because we just don't know anything at all, and it's just getting too much for me now. It's a long time gone, but if he just tells us, we'd know, and we can start living our lives again.
Sidney Cooke has never admitted playing a role in Mark Tildesley's killing, nor has Lenny Smith. But Smith did go to jail for another sex offence with a young child. He's still inside and due for release next year. As sex offenders in prison, the ring were in danger themselves. Bailey, convicted of 3 child killings, was murdered by 2 other inmates in this jail, Whitemore.
When they killed him in prison,
Leslie Bailey.
I opened a bottle of plonk then, because I was so pleased that they got him.
He got what he deserved. That might sound callous, but that's how I feel. He got what he deserved.
In the last 5 years, a treatment programme for sex offenders has been available in 25 prisons, and the highest risk offenders are encouraged to go on it. It's designed to make offenders come to terms with what they've done. But prisoners aren't compelled to go on the programme, and about 50% refuse, including, we understand, Sidney Cooke. For those who do take part in the programme, it's currently believed that it reduces the risk of reoffending by about 1/3.
You're talking about a program that aims to change the way people think and the way people behave. And it would be unlikely that that would have a permanent impact that would last forever. It's not like giving somebody a vaccine that all of a sudden cures them of this sort of behavior.
So there are no guarantees?
Oh, there's certainly no guarantees, and we know that some of these men are going to go out and reoffend in spite of having treatment. The aim of it is to reduce the number of victims.
One by one, the gang are now being released. Robert Oliver, who we understand did take part in the sex offenders treatment programme, finished his sentence in September last year. He was still judged to present a considerable risk.
I think that he is a very disturbed, damaged man who, because of that, continues to pose a risk to children and young people. My understanding of him is that his capacity to actually learn from his behaviour is very, very limited. And so that is partly why he remains dangerous, because he doesn't have empathy for his victims, he doesn't have remorse, and I don't believe deep down he thinks what he's done is wrong.
The press reported Robert Oliver's progress, and he was met with protests wherever he went. After trying to settle in London, Swindon, Dublin and Manchester, he finally chose the south coast resort of Brighton.
My Detective Chief Inspector received a telephone call from colleagues in Greater Manchester to say that he was on his way. I have to say that we didn't exactly say thank you for that phone call.
Because I heard at one point that also Oliver was not.
From the moment Robert Oliver got off the train, the police began a 24-hour covert surveillance operation.
Or felt that a bit of freedom he should be allowed more.
And all the official agencies who might now become involved met to plan strategy in Brighton Police Station.
I don't know, I didn't know any details, I didn't really want to.
He had made contact with another paedophile in the area, which is clearly increases risk if somebody is making links with other like-minded people.
They go out and buy him food. Because he was giving money over and saying, I want food. This is what.
He'd been frequenting places in Brighton where there were unescorted children and young people, including paying a visit to the children's section of a local library.
He was observing children?
Yes.
Just sitting there looking at them?
Just sitting, looking, and in our view, putting himself in locations where he knew children were likely to be.
So in your terms, did he seem to be checking things out?
That was our analysis of what was going on. He spent a significant amount of time watching children.
I think that those were all indications, as far as I was concerned, that he wasn't actively seeking to stay out of trouble. If anything, he was putting himself into risky situations.
The Education Department wrote to all parents in Brighton, warning them that a paedophile convicted of manslaughter was in the area and that he was extremely dangerous. Were you concerned that the latter might have the effect, even if it reassured some, of greatly alarming a great many people?
And that is always the dilemma with those issues of disclosure. Do you tell and heighten awareness and therefore potential fears, or do you keep it quiet?
Under proposals now before Parliament, a convicted paedophile could be banned from spending time in places full of children by means of a restraining order, but that isn't law yet. And Oliver, publicly identified as a menace, and having been hounded and pursued across the country, turned himself in to the Brighton police and asked them to protect him.
He was certainly very anxious, certainly very frightened, and frankly at his wit's end. He had no money, he had no contacts in Brighton apart from the address, the hostel address that he'd been staying at, and he was very vulnerable in that sense.
Did you have some sympathy for him?
I think we did, as one human being to another. Yes, we did, because what we've always got to remember in the Oliver case is that there is a man who has been convicted for a very serious offence. He'd actually served his sentence. He was not under licence, he was not under supervision, and in essence, he was a free man.
He was held in this police station first, and then in another. His stay in Sussex police cells was expected to last just for a few days, but actually lasted 4 months and cost £50,000. Robert Oliver's case exposed a gap in the law and in public provision.
He was put in a secure police accommodation in Sussex. He was kept watched over by 2 officers 24 hours a day, and he spent most of his time on his bed in his cell, watching television and generally amusing himself in that way.
The probation service made hundreds of phone calls trying to place Oliver. They asked the special hospital at Broadmoor if they'd take him, and they came down to Sussex and assessed him, but turned him down. The system didn't have an answer. Robert Oliver was dangerous, but he wasn't legally insane or curable.
He falls between all stools. He is technically a free man. The public will not tolerate him in the community without considerable constraints around him because of his notoriety. We do not have the sufficiently secure accommodation on tap in the community, except in the special hospitals, who have said that he does not fall within the remit of the Mental Health Act. What we don't have at the moment is anything that deals with dangerousness per se. The criminal justice system convicts people and sentences them for what they've done. We haven't got anything that controls future dangerousness, and that's really where the gap is. When we've had somebody in prison, they haven't been reformed, we all feel that they still pose a real risk to the public. We haven't got a solution to that at the moment.
The problem has existed unsolved for years. The Home Office and the Department of Health are now trying to devise changes to the Mental Health Act and a new type of institution for offenders who may still be dangerous and disordered after their release. They could face indeterminate sentences until they ceased to be considered dangerous, which might be until they died.
The problem is that you have an accumulation of men in hospital who you are concerned are dangerous. You're not doing anything for them other than keeping them off the streets. Well, that isn't the role of hospitals. If you want to keep these men off the streets, then they should be in some sort of prison setting, not in a hospital setting.
So we shouldn't kid ourselves. If we want to lock them up and throw away the key, fine, but that's not what your job is.
If society wants to take the decision that these men should be kept off the streets, that's fine, but they should be put into prison, not into hospitals. Hospitals don't function well as prisons.
Eventually, a place was found to take Oliver for the time being. This medium-secure psychiatric unit, called Blenheim House, in Milton Keynes, where he's now being assessed. It's less than 20 miles away from Northampton, where Jason Swift's cousin, Emma, lives.
I just sat and cried my eyes out. I couldn't believe that he was literally half an hour up the road from my hometown. It's like rubbing a family's nose in it. I just couldn't believe it.
Because that secure unit at Milton Keynes is quite close to us here in Northampton.
It is, and because he went in voluntarily, he can actually walk out any time he pleases.
First there was Oliver, and very soon afterwards Emma Swift received another shock. In March this year she learned that another of the 4 men convicted of killing her cousin, Stephen Barrell, had been released and was living in her hometown. Barrell's home in Northampton was close to a school.
Very sick. How can you come out of, well, I don't know how long he's been out, to be honest, but actually live just a few yards from a lower school? It's not right. And living in my hometown, it really is not right at all.
The police had known that Barrell was living in Northampton, but they hadn't disclosed this information to the public. A court case had just established that they did have the right to disclose where a former sex offender was living, but only if there was a pressing need to do so. They didn't believe there was.
We don't believe he was one of the principal members of the gang, and I think that was reflected in his sentence. A minor player in, if you like, in the hierarchy of the gang, and I don't believe that, from any evidence that I've had or any information that I've got, that he presents anything like the danger that the others do.
And you can talk, can you, about minor players, even though they're involved in child sex killing?
You got into the habit of adopting phrases which the public would find disgusting, and I accept that. But yes, a minor player, if you like, in the death and abuse of one child.
It was the local paper, the Northampton Chronicle, who discovered Stephen Barrell and exposed him. They checked the Press Council's code first. 9 years previously, Stephen Barrell had been convicted of the manslaughter of Jason Swift. He wasn't involved in other killings that members of the ring committed. Barrell hadn't been charged or questioned about any offence since his release 3 years before the Chronicle's exposure.
These things are not necessarily solved in terms of the individual with a sentence, and so the danger to the community continues after the sentence. It left us having to assess whether or not we felt there was a risk to people who might read our paper and be a member of our community.
Whatever the courts might have said, whatever the courts might have done, there was a bit more judging to do here.
Yes, and there was nobody's really in a position to give us any other guidance other than our own assessment of the risk.
I think even the newspaper editors who are publishing will recognize that if these men then go into hiding, that they're more dangerous. And by publishing their names, if that's going to make them go into hiding, then they've done something which has actually increased risk rather than decreased it.
You knew where he was before you published.
Yeah.
Do you know where he is now?
No.
Is that because of your story? But you don't know where he is now. You knew where he was before.
We knew where he was before because...
So anybody else who might have wanted to know and might have needed to know where he was before would have known. You don't know where he is now?
We don't know where he is now, no. No. And clearly he's moved because of our story, yes.
Complete news and information. Northants 96.
It's 2 o'clock, here's Nicola.
Emma Swift ended the White Ribbon campaign after 14-year-old Jason Swift was...
For a short time after he was splashed on the newspaper's front page, the police and probation service didn't know where Barrell, who's changed his surname, had got to either. But they do now. Response to the story was strong, and there's now a local campaign to keep sex killers behind bars for the rest of their lives.
But the ones we know of, obviously Sidney Cooke and fellow friends, and other people, once they've served their sentence, to be escorted to a secure unit or some kind of mental secure unit, obviously if they're mad or not.
But for all the real fear felt by campaigners, the statistics of child sex abuse are that the risk isn't normally from a predatory attack by a stranger at all.
This attention to convicted sex offences is actually more dangerous to public safety. We know that children are much more at risk from being abused by people within their families, by people in clubs that they might be going to, if they're in institutions, within those institutions. And it's there that that we need to be doing things to protect children. Simply focusing on one individual and somehow thinking if we can cleanse society of him, our children are safe, I think is a dangerous illusion.
But the attention and the protests were all to be focused next on Sidney Cooke, the leader of the gang. On April the 6th, Cooke was released from prison, his sentence served. A few days before his release from Wandsworth, he told the authorities he wanted to go to Bristol. And so he was taken to a police station in the Avon and Somerset area. And in Yeovil, by the police station where they believed he was being held, parents started to demonstrate, night after night.
No, he's not free, because he's in the police cell, and if he comes out, we'll all have him. We'll give him something to remember us by. Just put him amongst us, women, we'll soon sort him out. We can sort him out, us women.
Get him out!
Sometimes you just feel sick all the time. To know that this person is out. And he said he would re-offend again. And I just feel for someone else's children. Someone that could go through what I'm going through. And what other parents have gone through that have had children killed by these people.
The probation service had very few places where Sidney Cooke could go. They were working on a plan to put him in a bail hostel in inner city Bristol, in a house in this road in the St Paul's area. Serious offenders are placed from time to time in bail hostels. But this one overlooked a children's nursery. The plan leaked out, and the police and the probation service agreed to attend an open meeting.
What measures are you going to put into place if this guy moves into this community? And how are you going to protect our children? I want to know a door by door now.
We want to know if he comes into this area and what day. It's up to the authority to protect us. It's not crying out loud.
Among the top officials in the probation service and the police who had to face the community where they contemplated placing Sidney Cooke was the senior policeman who was regularly seeing him.
I do understand. Let me say straight away, I do care.
It's no good saying that you understand. That's no good.
Mr. Cooke walked through those prison gates a free man. He said he was coming to Bristol, and I know no way in which I could prevent him. You see, it's a question of choices. You make a big point on this, but would we rather he had walked through the prison gates with his release money in his pocket and gone on his own way? Is that really an acceptable choice? And what we are talking about today is, do we want these people to be managed and controlled on release, or do we want to drive them underground?
The man said he's going to re-offend again, and you want to dump him in our community. That is the risk factor. Keep him in prison, because if he comes down here, hey.
We could have allocated space to house him. He could have been under total surveillance. He could have been escorted by the police outside the hostel. He could have been tagged and kept in that situation. We'd know immediately if he had left the situation, and it would have given us the potential to work very intensively to see if we could effect any change in his attitudes.
Also, we need to know how you're planning to protect us. We need to know that.
We very much hear what you've said. We haven't made any decisions yet. There will be another meeting later this week when we'll continue to look at solutions for this very, very difficult problem. But
go back to Sidney and tell him, because he has the choice to come here if he wants to, we would like you to go to him and tell him you don't think it's a good idea for him to come here. Come on. If he comes to St. Paul's, he comes at his risk.
He is well aware of the hatred which the public has for him. He certainly does not want to face the public. But what else can you do with him? What else can you do with Mr. Cooke? Are you seriously suggesting to me that he serves his prison sentence and then we lock him up again? It doesn't work like that. Society isn't like that, thank goodness.
You say thank goodness?
Thank goodness, yes. If a person serves their term of imprisonment, then surely it's incumbent on society to make every effort to rehabilitate this person.
To rehabilitate him?
Which is what? To rehabilitate and to absorb him into society.
But reabsorbing child sex offenders convicted of serious crimes, even releasing them into supervised, secure accommodation, provokes fearful opposition, which Cooke in turn fears. The government says a new committee will manage things better in future. For other potentially dangerous offenders still have to be released, including Lenny Smith, the last member of the ring. And Sidney Cooke must go somewhere safe to defend the children.
How can they keep him in a secure unit if he doesn't wish to stay there? They can't even keep him in the police station if he doesn't wish to stay there. He can walk out at any time. So what happens in a month, 2 months' time when the publicity has completely died down and he wishes to walk out and to meet up with the people he was formerly associated with? There's nothing to stop him.
When things calm down a bit, and all the fuss has died down a bit, you told me he was a free man.
Yes.
You emphasised his rights.
Yes.
So he has the right to walk out.
He does indeed, and if Mr. Cooke does walk out of the police station, we will react accordingly. If necessary, we can put a policeman with him 24 hours a day. But we will not duck the issue. We are determined to protect the public, and community safety will and always be, above all else, our priority.
In any realistic sense, could he actually walk out? Could he then?
In theory, yes. In practice, no. He has nowhere else to go.